Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Ligia Cushman. Looking forward to our conversation today, Ligia.
I am too. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Very welcome. Thriving. What does thriving mean to you, Ligia?
Ooh, um, thriving to me, I think over the years, I've been working in child welfare for 25 plus years. Don't want to date myself too much. Um, but I would say that over time, thriving has looked different. I think now in the season that we're in, thriving to me looks like freedom to be your authentic self. Um, Thriving means, being accepted as you are. And it also means, especially in the concept of like family, when I think about family, it means togetherness and in this together. And so for me, thriving has been something that I have strived for, not just professionally, but then also as an adoptive parent, as a mother of an adoptee. I have definitely wanted him to thrive. Um, and a lot of that has to do with, the ways that I've seen him thrive. It's definitely had to do with our openness in adoption, the ways that we talk about adoption, the ways that we know that this is not our story as his parents, but it's his story. And so thriving is also his ability to own that story in ways that matter.
Yeah. Wow. So there's a lot there. Let's dive in. You're talking about freedom to be authentic self and accepted as you are. So that seems to me to indicate two bits, right? So the first one is an internal driver, right? Internal freedom, and then
Yes.
accepted as you are is about the external perspective on this, right?
Correct. Internally, I think that thriving, I've worked with a lot of children as a therapist and as a social worker. I was an adoption social worker for 8.5 years out of the state of 7.5 years out of the state of North Carolina. I have seen and witnessed thousands of adoptions take place. And I think when I think of that internal driver of thriving, it's this idea of belonging as you are. And so internally, I've always searched for that myself. I'm the daughter of immigrants from the Dominican Republic, but I'm also first generation American. And so I fit in two worlds as our son fits in two worlds, right? He has this first family, and we have always wanted him to, well, let me say it this way. The way that I experience him thriving and see it in real time is his ability innately to know that he is loved by everyone and there is room to love everyone, including himself. And so that internal motivator has always been really important for me as his mom, but then also for myself as a woman of color, as a mom, as a professional in the workforce, um, really helping families know that even in adoption, you can thrive as a family. Even in adoption, your child can thrive as a person. So that's the internal right driver of I want to strive for this because my child deserves this. Their first family deserves this. We deserve this. But then this external driver, about thriving. Um, I think that version of thriving has become a little commercialized, right? By those who glamorize adoption or, it's this idea of, I think back in the day, thriving was your child is thankful that you adopted them, thankful that you brought them into the space. And really, for a lot of us now, especially, I think that thriving is can you talk about adoption? Can you have really hard conversations? And for me as a professional, right, can I have really hard conversations with adoptive parents about how they are not saviors in this space, but that they can actually be a catalyst to building family, to building community, to ensuring that this child has access to their origin, and their people, their actual people, right? And so, to me, when I think of a family or a young person or an adoptee that is thriving, they've been able to um, have all the pieces of themselves show up and be well received and accepted without this idea of you have to be thankful externally, especially. So whenever I've been at conferences and we've brought our son with us, um, I I I don't like it when people go up to him and they're like, "Oh, you should be so thankful. Aren't you thankful?" Well, he didn't ask to be adopted. This was not his choice. And so again, when I'm talking about that external piece of thriving, people see a happy 19-year-old who's going to college and he's driving his car and he's got this life. Oh, you should be really thankful because where would you have been if? And the reality is that I never want our son to feel thankful about
Yeah.
us adopting him. I want him, because that's external, right? That's for other people to feel good about adoption. I want him to feel whole. I want him to feel seen and I want him to feel heard. And so it's not a popular opinion amongst adoptive parents in my hemisphere, um, but it is one that over time I have grown into because I have listened to adoptees and I've been listening, um, definitely for the last 10 years about what matters to them most. And it's acceptance of who they are. Um, so yeah, I hope I answered your question. I don't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it's a discussion, right?
Mhm.
We sometimes get into this space on the podcast, and I like to make a really clear distinction between spontaneous internal gratification, sorry,
Right.
gratitude,
Yeah.
spontaneous internal
Yes.
gratitude, right,
Yeah.
versus forced gratitude.
Correct. Correct. 100%.
For and I have also never really. I think this "you should be grateful" stuff is, and this is just my perception.
Sure.
It's bigger in the States than it is in the UK.
100%.
I think,
Yes. Yeah.
um, and and I think that might be something to do with the fact that as a whole, Americans are more religious than Brits,
Mhm.
and the church has played a bigger role in adoption than
A
it.
huge role. Yeah, for sure. A huge role. And I would say probably 20 years ago, um, I saw a huge uptick in um, church members, parishioners adopting at a high level. And I think there was this huge movement of, if one family would adopt one child, then you'd have this ability to really save these poor orphans. And so, not that I like the terminology, but that's really what is the driving force behind that. And for all the ways that that was great, there were also many things that happened during that era and that continues to happen that's not so great. Um, like be thankful, like um, I don't see color, like those things that again, so when I talk about an adoptee being able to be their whole person, their whole self, um, that is something that we are still striving and working really hard at. I can see it in the newer adoptive families where there is this acceptance and welcoming of the first family or the family of origin. Whereas 15, 20 years ago, that, first of all, that's not even something we talked about. And now I do see um, families in the States doing the real hard work because the work isn't on the child. And I think that's something we've gotten wrong here too. It's on the parents to make the safe space, to be uncomfortable in this adoption that they've chosen to step into. Like, be uncomfortable. We've been uncomfortable for our son many times because it was the right thing for him. And so um, that's that, again, that's that external piece that for me to see if a family is really truly thriving in adoption, there are some really key factors we need to see. And that's one of them. Are the parents more uncomfortable than the child? Because it should be that way. So adoption is not um, and people don't like it when I say this either, but adoption is not a normal process of growing and becoming a family. We talk about it like it is, but it isn't. It is complicated, it is hard and beautiful, it is love and loss, and it can be all of those things at the same time. And so whenever I've trained potential foster or adoptive families, I make it very clear this will not be an easy walk. This is not an easy thing to do. And um, there are times that you will feel uncomfortable, and you should, and you should.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's okay.
And and as adults or as kids or as teens,
Mm-hmm.
we're not
No,
we're not good at being we're not good at feeling uncomfortable, are we?
no, we're not. We're definitely not. And before I became an adoptive mother, I was an adoption social worker. So I was training families week after week. I hadn't had children, and I was just telling them how they had to show up. When I had to live it out loud for myself, that's when I was like, oh, I've been going about this the wrong way in regards to training families. I have not acknowledged how difficult it's going to be and how hard it's going to feel, and that it is still incredibly necessary for our children to thrive internally and externally, right? And so, when I always tell people the catalyst for me professionally was when I became an adoptive mother, the way I spoke about adoption, the way that I interacted with families was different because I knew then um, thriving has to feel and look different in adoption, and that every adoption is completely different from the last. Like the idea that every adoption is going to feel the same and you'll finalize this adoption in 18 months versus people who finalize in 4 months, like that's not real. Every adoption is different, and every situation is different. And so I've learned to, at that time, I then learned to cater my training, my curriculum, my support to the very unique needs of each family instead of like these cookie cutter, plans of engagement and all of that. Everything was unique to the family. And I think we need a lot more of that
Yeah.
across the globe when it comes to adoption and post adoption support.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just gonna want to go back to that uncomfortable
Yeah.
idea because I've never heard it expressed quite as succinctly as that,
Mm-hmm.
and I love your succinctness with it.
Yeah. Thank
Uh,
you.
I when I get around that space, I think of something like growing adoptive parents' capacity to not take their kids' trauma personally.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and so I love the succinctness with which you say that, and I'm just wondering what you've learned about being comfortable about being uncomfortable.
Mm. Um, Ooh, that's a good question. I have been uncomfortable many times for our son. I'll give you an example because I like to give stories to the strategy, right?
Brilliant,
Um,
lovely,
one, I remember when our son had just turned 3, we were going into Walmart, and we lived in a very small town in North Carolina. And Walmart is where everybody gathered, right? Because it's a small town. And so we're going in to Walmart, just my son and I, and his mother is coming out. And she and I see each other. She had not seen him since he was a baby, right? And so, I mean, he was still a baby, but he's a toddler now. And so she's seeing him for the first time. I'm uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, there's this claiming that you want to do, like, oh, this is my son. And the reality is, in that moment, like instantly, I was like, no, this is our son. And so I brought her in. I was like, oh my gosh, look, he's so big. He has your eyes. He looks just like you. Um, Was I uncomfortable? Absolutely. I don't know many people who give birth to their children and have to share them with other people in the same way. Um, and our son's always been like super loving, and he's just a really a joyful person. And so even back then, he gave her a hug, he gave her a kiss, and then he asked her for her drink, and it was like this big slushy um red dye drink. And all the new moms are like, not red dye, right? But she handed it to him. Some moms would have been like, oh, no, 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 I don't let him drink that stuff. But this was from his mother. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, those rules go out the window. I'll deal with whatever comes from this red tie later.
Yeah,
He's having this moment with her, and I need to respect that moment. And she, I think one of the things that I wish people knew about families of origin, birth mothers, first fathers, is that they are so nervous when they get to be in front of the child that they place for adoption. And that in and of itself is hard. And then as he's grown, she's also been uncomfortable because we've had to share with her some of his trauma, some of his experiences, why he shows up the way that he does in certain spaces, the anxiety that he carries, like all of those pieces um, make her also feel uncomfortable. So everyone's uncomfortable, and it's all because we love the same person. And to me, that's love, right? Love, if you've ever heard me speak, you know that I always say love requires action. And for those adoptive parents who feel like your action was adopting the child, that's great. But then there's, we focus on their treatment, their therapy, their mental needs, their physical needs. But then there's this also, who are they as people? Where did they come from? I remember him asking us those questions, and us, thank goodness we had the opportunity that we could reach out to her and ask her directly, like, where are your people from? How did they get here? Those were things that, had we treated her like a villain, had we villainized her, he wouldn't have the relationship that he has with her today, right? Um, and I think openness in adoption, at least in the States, it's like the scary thing, and it doesn't have to be. It will be uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be scary. Um, and so yeah,
yeah.
that's how I've.
I, I think you're ahead of us on that. I think you're ahead of us on openness, US compared to UK. Um, I wanted you mentioned love a couple of times, and at the outset, one of the first answers you gave, I think you were talking about lovability,
Mm,
to be loved, to feel loved. Can you let's just dive into that. What's all this about for you? What?
yeah. I one of the things that I never wanted, and again, right, when I became an adoptive mom, I thought differently, I behaved differently. Um, I never wanted him to feel unloved, unwanted. Um, in order for that to happen, it required a lot of work from us. So, another story I can tell you, at my sister's wedding, our son was the ring bearer. He was maybe 7. And we're at this wedding. Um, they just finalized the ceremony, and everybody's, the bridal party, they're stepping off the stage and coming into the atrium. And he comes right up to me, mommy, 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 were my parents married? Right? Again, uncomfortable moment at the worst timing ever, right? He had to go and take photos, and he had to go and do all these things. Love in action meant that my son is not going to be in the photos at my sister's wedding, because right now we have to answer this question. We need to give him time to process it, and that's okay. And so we did that. We made time for him to ask us questions. And he was 7, like maybe he asked 2 questions, right? Um, but we always were intentional about, this is important for him to understand. where he comes from. And, you give him the hard information. And the reality is, no, they weren't. Um, but she loved you enough to make this plan. And she's still a part of your life. So if you have any more questions, we will schedule some time with her and you can ask her more questions. And I think that was a real time moment where we were like, oh, we've got to, I didn't even, you never know what they're going to be thinking, right? Um, and so I do think that for us, having being intentional, and the love and action for us was always about making the time. So another example, a lot of adoptive parents that I've worked with say, when you ask them, so when was the last time you all talked with her about adoption? They'll say, oh, she never brings it up because it's the child's responsibility to bring that up. No, it's our responsibility, especially when they're younger, right? And even if they're not younger, but developmentally they are, we definitely had to have the space um, to make room for that conversation about um, where did he come from? What does that mean for him? And so for us, I do think that we have made and been intentional about bringing up adoption at every phase of his life. He's 19 now. We were just talking about it yesterday. Um, and now he brings it up. Why? Because he feels comfortable enough to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about self-love? I was, as you were
Mm-hmm.
talking, I was thinking about
Mm-hmm.
self-care. People talk a lot about self-care this at the moment, and uh, I was also, but I was thinking about loving ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
um, kind of role modeling it,
Mm-hmm.
leading by example,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's a good I'm trying to think of the ways that we've role modeled that for him. One is definitely therapy. He knows when we're actively in therapy. My husband sometimes goes to therapy. I do. He's gone. I think just his mom is a social worker, therapist by trade. So uh, we're really invested in feelings in this family and being able to talk about your feelings. And there have been moments where he has come undone about things, whether it's things outside in life or the adoption, where we remind him, you are loved, you are special, but no one should believe that more than you. And we're going to help you get to that space where you can own who you are. And so part of what parents can do for children is celebrate their wins, right? Encourage them when their losses, and letting them know, like, this is one mistake you've made, you know, this is one mistake you've made, and here's how this doesn't mean that it defines your whole life. And so we've made that space for him. I think it's working
Yeah,
because um, he loves himself. And I'm proud of that because I have seen a lot of adoptees really struggle with that. And again, I think we were intentional about having these relationships. We were intentional about taking breaks from those relationships when he needed it. We were also intentional about how does he fit in to both these worlds. Um, and we're still navigating that every day, right?
yeah,
Every day we're still navigating that with him. But he's in a good place.
yeah. What about your own, just digging a little bit deeper in kind of like
Yeah.
your own self-love. I was going to say self-love journey or the moment. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I
uh,
will I will
what's
say, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was the most profound healing moment that in my life that
Mm-hmm.
seems to yeah, that seems to land for people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is when I tell them about reading a letter from my birth mum to
Mm.
to the adoption social worker, in
Mm-hmm.
which in which I felt her love. I
Mm.
felt her love
Mm-hmm.
for me,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I felt her pain. Actually, I felt her pain. I felt which opened, which led to like a turbocharged empathy. And off the back on the back of that empathy came an incredible, overwhelming feeling. Um, sorry, I felt her love for me as the tears
Mhm,
came down my face.
mhm,
And people say that time is the greatest healer.
mhm.
And I don't think it is, right? If there's no change, then there's no healing.
Right.
So what is the greatest healer? And I think it's insights. For me, it's about
Mhm,
insights.
mhm,
And the most profound insight I've had is feeling her love for me, right? So people think about insights as quite kind of abstract, heady kind of construct things, but
mhm,
this was an all body experience.
mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
It was an all body experience, and I'm wondering what uh, if you've had similar self love moments on your own.
Yeah. So I am it's wild. So I am the daughter of immigrants from the Dominican Republic, first generation American. For those who can't see my face, I look like a Black woman, and I am fluent in Spanish. And so when I went on my own self-love journey, separated from my family, because when I married my husband, he's a white man from New Jersey, we moved to the deep South here in New York, in the United States. And we went from New York City, New Jersey to the deep South. And I would say that that's when my journey of self-love, self-discovery started. Um, and then we got married in our 20s, and then right around in my 30s, um, I went back to grad school and I was writing a paper about it was for like our ethics class, but it was focused on cultural and ethnicity and owning your own story. And so I had to go all the way back and all the way back and realize so many things about our own family. I had a lot of conversations with my parents. I interviewed them both separately from each other. And in that process, I got to see glimpses where my father still hadn't owned parts of his own story. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I can't let that happen to me. I need to not only love who I am as a person, right? The Black side of me, the Latina side of me, I lived in the South for 17 years. So I became a Southerner. um, I had to love all those parts of me. And it took a while. It took therapy. I'm going to be honest. When you have a child that, has developmental challenges or delays, there's parts of you that also um, struggles. I have dyslexia. That's not something I go around telling the whole world, but I've had to learn to love all those parts of me and and therapy has helped. Having people who love me and support me has also helped. So I don't think, and I'm just gonna be, this may not be a popular opinion either. I don't think people should be in therapy for decades upon decades. I think that therapy is good for the season and you go back when you need to and you take a break when you need to. And that has been kind of my way of self-healing, self-discovery, of believing that I can be smart, be beautiful, even if other people don't see me that way. And so I'm in a much better place. If you would have asked me this at 25, I'm afraid of what I would have said. But now I think I'm definitely in a space where I love myself and I laugh at the quirkiness that's me, but I also am able to, as his mom, I think him seeing me love myself, him seeing my husband love himself, that also models for our kids um, a strong self concept.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we can't expect others to do what we
Mm-mm.
can't do. So, I'm going to go back a bit on a cultural question on that, and it was something um, that popped into my head
Mm-hmm.
last week, actually. Self-love. So, in the UK, historically, he loves himself, or she loves him. She loves herself, and it was definitely more of the men loving
For sure.
themselves, right? Of
For
course, right.
shocker.
Um, it's shocker, yeah.
Right.
There's a yeah, and there were that used to be a criticism,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Or not. It was often a criticism, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was often a criticism here in the UK. Uh, I remember, well, growing up, he loves himself as a criticism. Was that the same was it the same in the States?
Mm. The States, gosh,
It's a massive question, a massive
I know, I
overgeneralization.
know. The race in the States alone is very compartmentalized. And so, um, I would say that in our country, white men are very confident. There is a lot of self-love. There is a lot of that you see. And just speaking honestly, my husband and I were just laughing about this the other day. I was like, how do you get to do that? Walk into the room and ask for the thing. And we laugh about those things because it's so prevalent in white culture, especially here in the States, that yeah, there is those spaces where, especially Black women, I didn't see myself as a Black woman. Let me say that, because that is what really blows people's mind. I didn't see myself as a Black woman until I moved to the Deep South. Before the South, I grew up in New York City and I saw myself as Dominican, a Dominican American. I'm Latina and I'm Black and I'm all those things. But in the South, especially where we moved to, they had never seen a Black girl that speaks Spanish. So they would always ask me, which one of your parents speaks Spanish? And when I would say, well, both of them do, they're both from the same island, people were surprised and they're like, yeah, no, but really, truly, they would think I was joking. That also messes up with your self-concept, right? It also messes up with, do I belong anywhere, right? So one of the blog posts I wrote years ago was about how I live in this hyphenated space, right? So I identify as Afro Latina, and in that hyphenated space, I am many things, and that's okay. And I think in our country, um, if it makes people feel right, we're going to go back to being uncomfortable, right? People don't want to be uncomfortable with your race. They don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to have to think harder than they have to about who you say you are. So when people would say to me, where did you learn to speak Spanish? I'm like, it's the first
Yeah.
language I spoke as a child. I learned to speak English watching Sesame Street with my parents. Like, I didn't speak any other language before that. Um, and that throws people off. I've had to learn to own my own story and not let people tell me what my narrative is, even if it makes them uncomfortable, right? Because again, accepting of a whole person, if you're not feeling uncomfortable, right, then I would challenge that your circle of influence, your circle of friends, are not really diverse. And so for me, that's where I find the richness, right? Is in that hyphenated space where and you can only do this if you love yourself fully, I think, or you're really close to it, right? Because I don't know that I'm 100% there, but that I make sure that people understand who I am. Um, my name alone is a challenging name to say. You say it beautifully, but there are people who will just say it any way they want and never ask, did I say it right? It took me years to challenge people when they said it wrong. Years. And I'm talking about probably over the last 5 years, I've started correcting people. Um, but that comes with my whole self. This is my name. This is who I am. This is how I make up my work. This is how I show up. This is how I parent. This is how I love. And so that part of like my ethnicity and my culture, my diversity, um, we're not a monolith. And I think just people in general are not a monolith, right? Adoptees all look different. Adoptive parents all look different. As a Latina, I look different. And I can embrace those pieces of myself. And I also want to help others embrace those pieces too. And if they can't, then that's not, before I used to think it was my problem, but it's not. It's really, oh, they're not in a space where they can move beyond what they believe that boxes that I should check. Um, so yeah, for me, I checked many boxes and I'm okay with that. Um, so yeah, that's just kind of been
Yeah.
my journey. And I'm still on it. Honestly, I'm still on it. I'm still trying to figure out um, when do I push, right? And when do I push back a little? And when do I let some things go? But for the most part, I would say right now in my life, I am definitely owning my own story. Because, you know, what we've learned from history, right? Brits can say this, Americans can say this. What we've learned from history is only based on, or the story that you get is based on who is telling the story. So when I do a lot of keynotes, I always remind people like, this is your narrative, own your story or somebody will own it for you. And so I don't ever want anybody to own my story for me. I want to be able to authentically tell you who I am, share who I am, and hope that you believe it. I think that's one of the hardest things for me in the States is when I tell you who I am and you don't believe it, it's alarming for me, but it used to like break me. And now I'm just like, oh, you don't understand that people look different and come from all walks of life looking different. And that's how the world's always been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say into continuing on the theme that we're on at the moment? What
Mhm.
what would you say that you've learned about self-love and transracial adoptees?
Mm. So our son is of mixed race. Um, and I'll start with that. And because I am married to a white man and I'm a Black Latina, I thought, and I was an adoption social worker, I thought I got this. I'm gonna get this so great. This is gonna be fantastic. Um, and no, I
And
didn't.
then, yeah,
I didn't. I
no,
didn't get it right. I thought I was getting it right, but for our family, where we were living was not great for him, right? I had a beautiful home. I could view the mountains. It was the cost of living was low. Like it was just ideal for what I wanted, but it was not ideal for raising a mixed race child. And we made the very difficult decision. And not a lot of parents do this. And I get all the reasons why. We made a very difficult decision to move from the small town we were in. We still stayed in the South, but we moved to a metropolitan area in a totally different state. And we did that right in the middle of what we call here in the States middle school. So it's like secondary, I guess I don't know, junior years. He was 13 at the time, and yeah, it was the pinnacle of teenage years. He was like, "What are you doing to me? You are ruining my life." Um, but I will tell you that I believe the self-love really evolved for our son when he started to see himself in the community he was living, not just a parent or the janitor, and not that any of those things are bad. None of that is bad. But he had never had a Black teacher in his life until we moved here. He had never realized that there were Black scientists. And while we thought we were teaching him well, we were doing things well for him, the reality was that the community also influences your child's ability and concept of self-love. And so if my child was one of two mixed race children in the whole school, one of two, um, I'll never forget the day. It was Martin Luther King's birthday. He had the day off, we had the day off, and we were on our way to some, like historical event that we were gonna take him to. And he's sitting in the back seat and he says to us, "Hey, mommy, you and I are from the wrong part of town." or the wrong side of the tracks. And that is a very American way of saying them versus us, white versus black. And he was probably 8. So we pull the car over because my husband he had never heard him say anything like that. So we pull over and we turn to him and we're like, where did you hear that? And he was like, oh, at school. We're reading a book about World War II. And in the book, it talks about us, Black people are from the wrong side of the tracks and white people are from the right side of the tracks. And he looked at my husband and he goes, so Daddy, what does it feel like to be from the right side of the tracks?
Wow.
We didn't teach him that, but his school was teaching him that. And of course, I was irate. Of course, I called the school. Of course, I had a meeting with the principal. And there's the school's solution was, well, Miss Cushman, why don't you come in and you teach the kids how to do this well, right? And I thought, wow. So not only, and they weren't being condescending, they thought it was a great idea. And I again, when I talk about love in action, even teachers, even school systems need to show that they really truly love and care for our children. So what does love in action look like? And I said, I cannot come in and do that work for you, but I can direct you to the books. I can direct you to the, X, Y's, and Z's. I can direct you to questions to ask the children after they read a certain chapter that's talking about that. So there had been no conversation, right? To tell kids, in our country, we don't function like this anymore. They just let the kids keep reading. And so, I challenge those pieces, but there are times where self-love is about, especially for him, I needed him to see himself in his community, and he didn't until we moved here. And as hard as it was to sell our home, to leave jobs we love, to leave our friends behind, to leave family behind, I can tell you we're now here 6, 7 years. We do not regret it at all. And every time we go back, we're like, wow, we lived here. This is wild. Um, but with that came the freedom. So I do believe that it's not just how you're raising your child, but your community is going to ultimately influence, and it ultimately influenced my self-concept of love, right? Some of the most hardest racially charged moments in my life happened in that small town. Um, haven't happened since in the same way. But it has forever changed me as a person. And it taught me also that I had to face some real hard moments, um, to explain to people there is value in my life. There is value. And the reason why there is value is because I believe it for myself, not just my mom, not just my dad, not just my siblings, my husband, but I have to believe it for myself. And so if we can show our son that by relocating, right? And we remind him when we talk about the move, because we still talk about it. When we talk to him about the move, we say, we did that for you. We needed you to have something different. And I think he's happier for it. I think he's more balanced for it. I think he can see himself in the community that he's grown to love. Um, and so yeah,
Yeah.
that's been how
Yeah.
community is an influencer on self-love as well. And it was healing for me to be around people
Yeah.
that looked like me and people that didn't. It was healing for me to have both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard the phrase existential wrongness? Have you heard that?
No, I haven't.
It blew. I didn't hear it within an adoption
Mm-hmm.
context,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it was it kind of summed up how I say there's if there is a primal wound, there isn't one primal wound. Uh, Mine feels like a paper cut, and
Mm-hmm.
and somebody else feels
Sure.
like somebody else feels like an attack by a great white shark, and it's taken a
Mm-hmm.
chunk out of the leg, right? It's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but existential wrongness for me was a great, a horrible, but very horrible, but very succinct way of summing up somebody with a really bad, um, really large primal wound. And I'm thinking why I brought it up is you talked about the wrong side of the tracks. So we use the wrong side of the tracks here in the UK as well. But it would in the UK it would normally be actually economical. So it would
Right.
be to do
Class.
with it would be income. Yeah, income.
Mhm.
It would be about income rather than race. I think, right? And this is just a mass generalization. And I live in a very white area, very white
Mhm.
area. So
Mhm.
it might just be me and my privilege and my thing, just putting it in the wrong way, wrong side of the tracks. But are you making are you joining two dots here? Or am I joining two dots here that don't exist between self-love and race?
Oh, no, no, no. They go hand in hand. They're married together. They're embedded together. Um, you know, I was recently interviewed by the Imprint News, social work magazine newspaper here in the States. And they were asking what what are my thoughts on transracial adoption? And I said, and it's been a big deal in the States. I don't know if it's a big deal in the UK, but in the States, um, a lot of adult adoptees, many of these adult adoptees work for me. So they have definitely shared their frustrations about um, my parents loved me, my adoptive parents loved me, they gave me the care that I needed, and they also didn't see me as a Black woman, or they also didn't see me as a Latina. Um, and so um, when I talk about love in action as an adoptive parent, I mean, do not rely on your Black child to be your gauge on what race, to be your teacher on race and ethnicity. A parent who truly loves their child is going to buy all the books, it's going to go to all the workshops, it's going to make time to educate themselves and to challenge what they were taught as they grew up. Because once you adopt a child that doesn't look like you, that doesn't have the same background as you become a multicultural family. And I will tell you that the Deep South in the United States is still significantly problematic when it comes to multicultural families, um, let alone multicultural couples, right?
Yeah.
My husband and I, we've experienced our own very real moments again in the Deep South. That these we're two kids from New York City, New Jersey, who had friends from every walk of life, and then we come into the South where people judge our relationship from the jump, and so we knew when we were raising a family that it would our children would also struggle, and they would struggle in a different way. So my son is much lighter than I am. He is what we would call a little bit more white passing than I am. And so as I was trying to teach him about these hard things, people may stop you and they may say all these things. He hasn't experienced that in the same way that I have. I'm darker skinned. I I just look different. And so I've also had to teach myself that, oh, yes, he is seen as Black, he is seen as all these other things, and he's also white in a very white world. And so how do we teach him to love both parts of himself? I have met mixed race children who have chosen one side over the other, and I think that is damaging also. We wanted him to have this balanced love for himself, but then that meant that I had to have a balanced love for myself. I had to embrace and love the African side of me, and I was not raised to love that part of me. I was actually raised to hate that part of me, to ignore that part of me, to whenever anybody confused me with being a Black person. And for those of you who can't see me, I'm blackity black. Like, if anybody wanted to challenge that, that I would push back and say, no, I'm Hispanic. I am not what you're saying I am. Well, in the South, I got really tired of that. Up north, it did not happen even half as much as it happened in the Deep South. And so, um, owning my story, being able to explain to people who want to hear it, because not everybody cares, who I am, where I come from, we have to do that with our children too. So, for our son, we also did his DNA. We did DNA testing, and as an adoption social worker who was working in North Carolina, we adoptions are closed in North Carolina for the most part. It's up to adoptive parents how open it's going to be or how closed it's going to be. But legally, you don't have to have an open adoption. But we chose openness, and I say all that because for my son to see, he's raised by a Black mom. For him to see his white mom with very blue eyes showing up and also loving on him, I think between my husband, his mom, and myself, we've been able to really cultivate a space for him where he can see that all people can love each other, even when the whole world doesn't necessarily agree with it. And for transracial adoptees in particular, the ones I've been listening to, the ones I've been I'm going to challenge every adoptive parent from the sound of my voice. Sit down and be quiet and listen to what adult adoptees have to tell us. When we do that, we remove our judgment, we remove our feelings from it, and we just listen. I think one of the things, for all the things that quarantining during the pandemic was not good for a lot of people's mental health, for me, it was good in this sense that it forced me to just sit and listen to adoptees. It forced me to just hear them out on social media without replying. No comments, no backlashing, not taking it personal, just hearing from them about this very real issue we have in our country about who are people, how are they showing up, what makes you Black, what makes you white, what makes you Puerto Rican. And that, for our son in particular, he'll tell you, I'm Black and I'm white. And I always wanted him to love both parts of himself. And so, for example, for my husband, loving his white side has been a challenge, especially in this country. He also had to get to a place where he loved himself so that he could teach his son about what it means to be white in America. What does it mean to be? And so that I can teach him, what does it mean to walk around with this colored skin in this country? And that yes, our country is racially fueled. There is, I mean, if people
Yeah.
can't see that now, um, I
Yeah.
don't know if they will see it. It is racially fueled. And when you adopt transracially, you are unknowingly, for a lot of adoptive parents, you are stepping into that space. And teachers are going to treat your kid differently. And sometimes it's not your child's fault, right? Sometimes it's just how they look. And that's hard, especially in the United States, where we, for a long time, believed that we were colorblind as a nation, or that we have come so far as a country. There have been many moments in the last 10 years where people have kindly, not so kindly,
Yeah.
reminded me of my place in this world, or reminded me of, don't talk too much about, you're upsetting adoptive parents when you say this isn't about you, but it isn't, right? For a lot of us who have adopted, it's very selfish. We did a selfish thing, and then we get to be patted on the back for the rest of our lives for doing a selfish thing. And I've had to reconcile that too. That's part of that self-love, right? I am his mom and I love my son. And I, as an adoptive mother, I would not have it any other way. So you're never going to hear me say, like, oh, I wish he would have. If it would have been best for him, I would have loved for him to have that life with his family of origin. And I also have to own the decision I made to adopt him and love him wholly as he is. And for us, that's always meant welcoming all the parts that make him him, the Black, the white, the brown, all of it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That sounds like a really good place to bring it in, Leah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Leah.
Thank
And thank you,
you.
listeners.
This has
Uh,
been great.
we'll
Thank you
speak,
all.
we'll speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye bye.